Thank you for speaking up. So how do you identify and understand the concerns that you're writing on that prior written notice, the PWN, and determining what areas need to be assessed?
If we're just doing a triannual and there's no other concerns, I'll just mark health and communication on the assessment plan.
But for initials or additional assessments, we typically rely on referral information from SST notes, and we can also look at previous records if they had concerns at the last try.
And as you work to understand those concerns, how is information typically gathered from families, teachers?
So most of that information is gathered through our interview forms that we send out with the consent, or when we receive the consent back.
When you say can send out, what does that mean?
So typically we mail it home. So we mail the consent home or we email them to parents. So it's the consent for assessment.
That's helpful. I kind of want to widen the lens a little bit. What does it look like from the staff perspective on how we interview when we're assessing?
Typically, I will get an interview form and email it back if it is a Google Doc. I just fill it out, also get the rating scales that Miss Progress sends over. After that, I'm really not sure what the information gets used for.
Well, given your relationship with students and just how well you get along with them in your class, I think that classroom context is really important. So thanks for always getting that back to us.
I know for me, because I'm always pushing at classrooms and constantly collaborating with other teachers who are willing to engage, right? I feel like I get the most out of those conversations and the students that I have classes with, or those meaningful conversations are happening, those students are probably getting the most gains. I don't get to see the data. I'd be happy to see it too, but that's, the gist of where I'm getting my lens from.
Thanks for sharing. I know exactly which students and teachers you're talking about, and they are showing so much growth. Anyone else?
Typically, if I do an FBA, I do more in-person or phone interviews. If I'm mostly assessing for eligibility, then I'll email the interview to the staff.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
All right, thanks for sharing. So it sounds like our assessment process are clearly established when like looking at the required components, and those are consistently completed. But a lot of our collaboration sounds like it's coming from documentation rather than dialogue. So if I just kind of like want to understand, reflect, and possibly name this as a problem of practice. Because it sounds like what you're saying is those multidisciplinary assessments and collaboration often function as that compliance-driven task rather than like an inquiry-based process. And I think that might limit our understanding of how we support kids, including like the goals, services, and supports we're recommending. What are your initial thoughts from me saying that?
So I will add that when I do my interviews for the FBAs, the way I do them is in person, and then I do get a lot of information from the teachers. Sometimes I wish I knew this information prior because it could have helped us avoid an FBA and try other things instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that intentional collaboration really helps being proactive versus being very reactive. I'm sure that's both in behavioral aspects and academic aspects too.
And I do feel like sometimes our goals overlap, like in the area of reading comprehension, and it would be great to hear how others are targeting that versus how I support that. I also think a lot of staff, like general education teachers, don't even know what skills I'm targeting with their students.
Yeah, so based on prior experience, I've observed that some elementary IEPs often do not include goals that address behavioral needs. So then when those students transition, those unaddressed concerns typically come up, and then there's a requirement for increased level of support for those kiddos.
It's helpful. I also just like want to remind everybody, nobody's doing anything wrong. It just sounds like that's how we've been doing it. That's how our practice and how our system's been structured. So as a next step, what are your guys' thoughts on piloting just small intentional collaboration points within that assessment process? And I do think then when it's feasible to kind of prioritize that direct communication, whether that's in person, Zoom, especially with parents, teachers and service providers before we're finalizing that assessment process. How does everybody feel about that?
I think it's manageable and it makes sense.
All
Yeah,
right,
I
can everybody
agree.
get
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
agree.
I would agree.